In tonight's episode, we're uncovering some of the most chilling, unexplained events from national parks around the world. Stories of missing persons, eerie encounters, and strange occurrences that defy explanation. From eyewitness accounts to paranormal phenomena, this is a journey into the heart of true high strangeness. On September 6, 2020, a 31-year-old named Nathaniel Brooks from Portland set off on what should have been a simple hiking trip. He began his journey from the Crystal Springs Reservoir, a popular starting point for outdoor enthusiasts, aiming to reach the distant High Rock Lake about 9 miles away. For those familiar with the area, this was supposed to be an easy hike, one that Nathaniel had done before, but something went horribly wrong. Nathaniel was an experienced hiker and his route was well traveled, so when he didn't return by nightfall, his friends didn't think much of it at first. They figured he might have stayed a little longer, taken a detour, or decided to camp overnight. But as hours passed and he didn't check in, worry began to creep in. When he still hadn't shown up by the morning, a search party was dispatched. What they found in the forest was beyond anyone's imagination. His gear was located near a small stream that cut through the forest, a place he had no reason to be. His water bottle, hiking boots, and even his jacket were neatly placed as if he had just stopped for a break. But Nathaniel himself was nowhere to be found. The strangest part, the searchers found no trace of him, no footprints leading off the trail, no signs of struggle, just an eerie stillness in the woods. As the search went on, things only became stranger. The forest around the reservoir was dense, but not so thick that someone could disappear completely without leaving a trace. Days passed, and despite the best efforts of the search team, Nathaniel was never found. And then came the stories. Locals and rangers began to share their own unsettling experiences in the same area. Some spoke of hearing strange whispers on the wind, voices that seemed to come from nowhere, voices that didn't belong to anyone in the park. Others talked about the feeling of being watched, like something was lurking just beyond their sight, always just out of reach. Some rangers claimed to have seen figures in the mist, moving in ways that couldn't be explained by human or animal movement. One of the most unsettling accounts came from a fellow hiker who had been on the same trail days before Nathaniel's disappearance. He reported seeing a figure, a man, standing at the edge of the woods, staring at him. When the hiker called out to him, the figure vanished into thin air. Was this some kind of bizarre coincidence? Or was there something else, something darker, lurking in the woods of Crystal Springs? Now, I want to know from you, do you think Nathaniel simply got lost, or is there something more sinister at play here? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned for even more chilling stories from our national parks. Nathaniel, 35, had planned to return to the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir by September 9th, only 3 days after setting out, but he never made it back. On that Saturday morning, he was declared missing, and Yosemite National Park officials quickly released a statement with his description. They stated that Jonathan was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, had a buzz-cut brown hair, and was last seen carrying a yellow and grey backpack, a green sleeping bag, a blue and green hammock, and a red inflatable kayak. They urged anyone who had been in the area of Miguel Meadow Lake Eleanor or the trails surrounding the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir to come forward with any information about his whereabouts. Once the search began, Yosemite Search and Rescue could find no trace of him. In fact, Jonathan's wife, Lisa Hamilton, made a Facebook post the day after he was declared missing, stating that at least 16 National Park Service search and rescue crew members, along with their dogs, were actively searching for her missing husband. The entire Tuolumne County even joined the search efforts, bringing along equipment, helicopters, kayaks and boats to cover the area where Jonathan was last seen, hoping to find some trace of him. But unfortunately, to this day, in 2022, there has still been no trace of Jonathan Hamilton. Could it be that, like so many other hikers who have disappeared in national parks, he was snatched, killed, or taken by something? Maybe he fell into a crevice or fell off a cliff. That's a real possibility. But don't you think that with all the experienced search personnel, rangers, and resources looking for him, they would have found something by now? It just doesn't make sense that so many hikers seem to disappear without a trace. And the trail he was taking from Hetch Hetchy to Lake Eleanor isn't exactly off the beaten path. In fact, the entire trail system within Yosemite National Park is well traversed, making it even stranger that he vanished without a trace. People were coming and going, so it wasn't like Jonathan had wandered off alone deep into the woods, unaware of his surroundings. That's what makes his disappearance even stranger, just like so many others who vanish without a single trace. I'd love to hear what you think. Could there be something more to these strange disappearances? Could there be something lurking beneath Yellowstone, something even more terrifying than we imagine? Yellowstone is home to some of the most infamous landmarks on Earth, none more so than its geysers. There are over 500 active geysers within its borders, the highest concentration of geothermal activity anywhere on the planet, and about half of all known geysers in the world are found right there. Along with these geysers, the geothermal activity feeds countless other wonders, from hot springs to pools of boiling mud. The intense heat and steam rising from these locations have inspired legends of mythical creatures like terrifying reptilian beasts which early settlers thought lived beneath the earth. These mythical creatures might not be as fantastical as we believe, especially within the strange confines of Yellowstone National Park. Take, for example, the July 30th, 1886 edition of the Alexandria Gazette from Virginia. It carried a curious story sourced from the pioneer press of Cinnabar, Montana. According to the report, two tourists had hired a stagecoach driver to take them through Yellowstone. Along the way, they were stunned to witness an enormous shape, about 30 feet long, moving through the tall grass near Yellowstone Lake. The tourists claimed it was some kind of creature unlike anything they had ever seen before. The creature they saw resembled a gigantic reptile, so towering that its head was suspended 10 to 15 feet above the ground on a long serpentine neck. The entire time, the beast emitted a chilling hissing sound that sent shivers down their spines. The tourists, terrified by the sight, immediately reported what they had witnessed to park authorities. A search party was swiftly organized to track down the creature. According to the Alexandria Gazette, Colonel David W. Ware, the superintendent of the park, along with his assistant and a park guide named Captain Jack Baronet, led a group of hunters deep into the wilderness to investigate. They made their way to Yellowstone Lake, where they eventually stumbled upon a cave near an extinct geyser. As they approached, they heard the same eerie hiss that the tourists had described. Moments later, a massive reptilian head emerged from the cave, stretching at least 15 feet beyond the entrance before quickly retracting. It's easy, perhaps even wise, to view such stories through the lens of the era's often questionable journalistic standards. Newspapers at the time were known to publish exaggerated or fabricated tales to boost circulation. But what if, just this once, the story wasn't made up? What if there's something hidden beneath the surface of Yellowstone, something that no one dares to understand fully? There didn't seem to be any follow-up to this extraordinary tale. One would think that a discovery like this would have sparked a flurry of hunters descending upon Yellowstone, eager to capture the creature. However, a researcher named John LeMay dug deeper into the 1886 story and uncovered some intriguing facts that suggest there might be more truth to it than we think. Both Colonel David W. Ware and Captain Jack Baronet were real people who had served in Yellowstone National Park during that time. In fact, Baronet was responsible for building and operating the first bridge across the Yellowstone River in 1871, and his legacy lives on in the naming of Baronet Peak. As for David W. Ware, he was indeed the park superintendent during those years and was well known for his honesty, qualities that earned him a later position as a U.S. congressman. Of course, you might be skeptical today about how much honesty and politics go hand in hand. But that's beside the point. Who knows? Perhaps one day scientists will discover the bones of a prehistoric creature buried in a forgotten cave deep within Yellowstone. They might declare the remains too recent to be considered fossils, and the mystery of Yellowstone's dragon might finally be solved. Until then, we can only wonder, was it fact or was it fiction? Spencer and his girlfriend at the time decided to take a lovely hike and camping trip in the remote Lincamp Falls area of the Great Smoky Mountains National Forest. This area is a long, narrow valley with a stream running down the center, surrounded by thick, wooded hillsides that rise sharply to meet the ridgeline. The park boundary lies at the far end of the valley, where the stream exits via a small cascade. Along the stream are several picnic areas, and a few small hiking trails lead into the dense woods. On this particular night, they set up their tent in a secluded, unoccupied picnic area on the west side of the stream, one of the most remote sections of the park. It was around 10:05 p.m., and they had just finished dinner when they heard it. The first howl.
Spencer will never forget that sound as long as he lives. It was a spine-chilling, guttural scream that echoed through the valley, the kind of sound that seemed to reverberate deep in your chest, sending a wave of unease through your body. He froze, eyes wide, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. Was it a wolf, a coyote, or something else entirely? The howl that Spencer and his girlfriend heard was unlike anything they'd ever encountered before. It was long, mournful, and seemed to come from every direction at once. The sound resonated deeply within Spencer's chest, vibrating through his entire body more than his ears. It was as if the earth itself was groaning, echoing the sorrowful cry. Her voice was trembling, and Spencer could feel the fear radiating from her. In an attempt to comfort her, they hurried inside the tent, but the sounds outside only grew more intense. The howl didn't sound like anything Spencer had ever heard in the wild, too deep, too loud, and too powerful for any animal he'd encountered. It was amplified, like a human voice being projected through a bullhorn. The noise seemed to be coming from just outside the tent, vibrating the very air around them. It was so unnatural, so unlike the calls of a coyote or any creature they had heard before. Spencer's heart raced as the deep, haunting sound lingered in the night. Then it became worse. They heard something heavy moving around outside their tent, pushing through the brush. Spencer's girlfriend began to panic, convinced it was a large black bear. But Spencer, trying to keep his composure, assured her, "Bears don't make noises like that." Grabbing a flashlight, he stepped outside, scanning the area. His light cut through the darkness, but there were no tracks, no signs of any animal nearby. Yet the presence was undeniable. Something was out there, watching them. It moved with deliberate care, as if it knew they were there, like a predator playing with its prey. Then, the smell hit. It was overpowering, an odor of rotting flesh mixed with sulfur. Spencer recoiled, nearly gagging from the putrid stench. It burned his nostrils and made his eyes water. The scent was strongest on the east side of the tent, but it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. It was too intense to be from a dead animal and too foul for anything Spencer could put a name to. Despite the fear clawing at him, Spencer felt a surge of bravery. With his Glock 19 in hand, one bullet chambered and ready, he shone his flashlight around, searching for any signs of what was lurking in the dark. That's when he saw it. A large shadow loomed just beyond the light, moving slowly through the brush. Spencer froze, his heart racing. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything he could recognize. What was it? As soon as Spencer's flashlight illuminated the shadow, it reacted instantly. The creature jerked its head towards him, eyes locking with his, as if it had been hiding in the dark and had just been exposed. The next moment, Spencer's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he dove back into the tent, his heart racing. He could feel the terror flooding through him, his mind screaming that whatever was out there was not human. He had to get away. His girlfriend, looking at him wide-eyed and confused, could see the fear on his face, but he didn't say a word about what he had seen. He didn't want to scare her more than she already was. Spencer zipped up the tent frantically, his hand still clutching the Glock 19, flashlight in the other, waiting for whatever was out there to make its next move. Silence had fallen. No crickets, no rustling leaves. Only the sound of something large moving around the tent, heavy steps brushing against the ground in the darkness. The hours dragged on like this, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the noises stopped. It left. The woods returned to normal, the night sounds resumed, but Spencer and his girlfriend stayed frozen in the tent, too terrified to sleep. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the trees, Spencer was relieved beyond words. They packed up and left as quickly as they could, not wanting to stay another second. They didn't return to the park for years after that night. They still have the tent and all the gear from that trip. But Spencer says that experience, especially the smell, will haunt him forever. No dead animal, not even the worst roadkill on a hot summer day, could ever compare to the foul, rotting odor they encountered that night. Moving on to another eerie location, Santa Fe National Forest.
Deep within the wilderness of Santa Fe National Forest, mysterious and massive wooden structures have been appearing seemingly out of nowhere. Each of these odd constructions is made up of over 1,000 pieces of wood, ranging from fallen trees to large branches, with some towering more than 20 feet tall and spanning up to 12 feet in diameter. What's even more puzzling is that there is no known explanation for who is building these structures, how they're being constructed, or why they exist at all. The sheer size of the materials used, requiring machinery to move, suggests that something far more unusual is behind them. Authorities are concerned, particularly about the fire hazards these structures pose. The risk of forest fires is significantly heightened, and if the structures were to collapse, they could seriously injure anyone nearby. As a result, anyone caught constructing these massive wooden forms could face fines up to $5,000 or jail time for up to 6 months. Despite these harsh penalties, teams of workers have been sent to dismantle them, but the strange structures seem to spring up just as quickly as they are torn down. There are many theories about the origin of these enigmatic constructions. One of the most popular is that a secretive cult might be behind them, using the structures for ritualistic or ceremonial purposes, though no one can say for certain. In another part of the country, a chilling disappearance took place that would add to the mystery of our national parks. On October 9, 2020, 33-year-old Sam B. Dubal set out for a solo hike in the treacherous terrain of Mount Rainier National Park in Washington. Sam was in peak physical condition and had eagerly anticipated this solo adventure. As is customary with solo hikes, he was expected to return the following day after completing the Mother Mountain Trail loop. But something went terribly wrong. Sam was last seen alive, in good spirits and healthy that same day, but as night fell and then the following day arrived, there was no word from him. By October 12th, he was officially reported as missing. Mount Rainier is infamous for being one of the most dangerous places to hike solo, not only because of the possibility of volcanic eruptions, but also due to the numerous hiking deaths, icy slopes, and natural hazards that have claimed the lives of many adventurers. Sam was well aware of these risks and had taken precautions, but despite his preparation, he disappeared without a trace, leaving behind an unsettling mystery that still lingers today. Sam was well prepared for his journey. He had a cell phone, plenty of equipment, and even an overnight tent. This wasn't his first time hiking alone. He was an experienced solo hiker. That's why his sudden disappearance on Mount Rainier was both strange and alarming. Mount Rainier, also known as Tacoma, is a massive and active stratovolcano in the Cascade Range of the Pacific Northwest. Towering over 14,000 feet, it is the highest mountain in Washington state and the entire Cascade Range. It sits within Mount Rainier National Park, located roughly 60 miles southeast of Seattle. Sam Dubal wasn't just an outdoor enthusiast, he was also a brilliant academic. In 2018, he earned his PhD in medical anthropology from UC Berkeley. By June 2020, he had begun teaching in Washington State's anthropology department. Colleagues, students, and friends all described him as intelligent, quick-witted, and deeply passionate about nature. When Sam went missing, park rangers launched an extensive 9-day search operation. Volunteers and fellow hikers combed through subalpine meadows, dense pine forests, rocky terrain, and even areas near bodies of water. Helicopters scanned the trails where he was last seen, yet no trace of Sam was ever found. As winter storms swept through the region, temperatures plummeted, making any further search efforts nearly impossible. Despite all attempts to locate him, Sam Dubal remains missing to this day. Mysterious disappearances in the wilderness aren't unheard of. The eerie phenomenon surrounding the Lake Michigan Triangle is another baffling case. In February 1978, a man named Stephen Kubacki vanished under bizarre circumstances. But what made his case truly astonishing was not just his disappearance, but his reappearance. At the time, 23-year-old Kubacki was a student at Hope College, a small Christian university in southeastern Michigan. By all accounts, he was intelligent, free-spirited, and an avid outdoorsman. He loved hiking, climbing, and backpacking. On this particular trip, he had set out on a cross-country skiing adventure near Lake Michigan, planning to be gone for no more than a day. When he failed to return, his family and friends immediately grew concerned. Soon after, snowmobilers near Saugatuck stumbled upon his abandoned cross-country skis and backpack, believed to belong to Kubaki. What happened next was beyond anyone's imagination.
Authorities were quickly alerted to Stephen's disappearance after receiving concerning information. It didn't take long for investigators to piece together a potential explanation. They discovered over 200 yards of footprints leading from the trail toward the edge of Lake Michigan. The chilling conclusion, or at least the prevailing theory, was that Stephen had somehow ventured too close to the water's edge, where the ice was thin. It's believed that he may have fallen through the brittle ice, plunging into the freezing waters below, ultimately meeting his tragic end in the icy depths. Despite the widely accepted theory surrounding his disappearance, the search for Stephen Kubaki didn't end there. For several agonizing days, search teams worked tirelessly, both on the ground and in the air, combing through every possible inch of the area. Yet no trace of Stephen could be found. It was as if he had simply vanished without a single clue, his presence swallowed up by the vast wilderness. With each passing day, the hope of finding him alive grew slimmer, and after numerous unsuccessful attempts to uncover any signs of his whereabouts, the search eventually came to a halt. Despite all the efforts and resources invested in finding him, Stephen Kubaki's disappearance remained a mystery, and it was officially concluded that he was gone, vanished without a trace. Now here's where the story takes a shocking turn. Fast forward to May 5, 1979, over 14 months after his disappearance, and Stephen Kubaki suddenly wakes up in a grassy field just outside Pittsfield, Massachusetts. The sun is shining, flowers are in bloom, and spring is in full swing. As he regains awareness, he realizes something is terribly wrong. Not only is he over 700 miles away from where he went missing, but he is also wearing an entirely different outfit. He has a brand new pair of sneakers, sunglasses he doesn't recognize, and a backpack filled with hiking and hitchhiking gear that isn't his. To make things even stranger, he finds a shirt from a Wisconsin marathon he has no memory of running and other items suggesting he had traveled through Chicago, Utah, and even San Francisco. Confused and alarmed, Kubaki manages to hitch a ride into Pittsfield where he gets his hands on a newspaper. The date reads, May 5, 1979. He is stunned. 14 and a half months of his life are missing, completely unaccounted for. With no memory of what happened, he makes his way to Great Barrington, where his aunt lives, just 20 miles from where he woke up. There, he reunites with his long-lost family, who are in disbelief. Reporters, relatives, and authorities all bombard him with questions. Where have you been? What happened? How could you disappear for over a year without a trace? But Kubaki has no answers. The last thing he remembers is trudging through the snow, fearing the darkness and cold closing in. He recalls sitting down to rest, overwhelmed by exhaustion and freezing temperatures. After that, nothing. His memory is a complete blank until the moment he woke up in Massachusetts. The mystery deepens. How did he end up 700 miles away? How did he acquire new clothes, gear, and evidence of cross-country travel? Some believe Kubaki was affected by the eerie and unexplained forces of the Lake Michigan Triangle, a region notorious for disappearances, strange sightings, and unexplained phenomena, much like the Bermuda Triangle. And while Kubaki himself was determined to retrace his steps and uncover what had happened to him, the truth remains unknown to this day. Another chilling encounter comes from a park ranger in Yosemite Valley, who, in 2011, witnessed something that defies explanation. The ranger, who prefers to be called Stephen, was patrolling his usual route along Northside Drive at around 11:10 p.m. He vividly remembers the moment because of the eerie image that still lingers in his mind. As he drove, he noticed movement in a nearby field, a figure standing on the right-hand side of the road. Assuming it was a lost hiker or camper needing help, he pulled over for a better look. But as the figure slowly rose, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. This was no ordinary person. It wasn't a Bigfoot or any known creature, but it also wasn't human. Stephen expected to see clothing, facial features, something recognizable, but there was nothing. The figure was a solid black mass, humanoid in shape, yet lacking any definition. In the dim moonlight, it looked like a living shadow. As Stephen stared in disbelief, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, the figure began to levitate. It moved, glided, silently in his direction, defying all logic. Frozen in place, gripping the steering wheel, he could only watch as it floated approximately 25 feet toward him before vanishing into thin air.
For a moment, he sat there, stunned. Did that really just happen? Was it an illusion? Sleep deprivation? A trick of the light? Desperate to ground himself in reality, he rushed back to the ranger station for a cup of coffee, trying to shake the terrifying encounter from his mind. But deep down, he knew what he had seen was real. At this point, Stephen was deeply unsettled, but kept the experience to himself for a while. However, what he learned the next morning only added to the mystery.
As I spoke with hikers and tourists in the area, several people asked me about a mysterious black figure that had been terrifying campers the night before.
One older gentleman shared that he and his wife had been terrified all night because something, or someone, kept trying to peer into their camper's windows. It even rattled their door handle, as if attempting to get inside. Yet, every time they looked outside, all they could see was a dark, featureless shape moving around their RV.
Another witness, a mother of 3, described a chillingly similar encounter. She and her kids had been roasting marshmallows by the fire when one of her boys suddenly pointed toward the tree line. Standing there, watching them, was a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. It had the shape of a man but was completely black, like a living shadow. Overwhelmed by a deep, gut-wrenching sense of evil, she quickly gathered her children, ushered them into their tent, and grabbed her firearm, ready to defend her family if necessary. But the figure never approached.
After speaking with these witnesses, Stephen realized that their encounters had taken place just an hour or two before his own sighting in the same general area. The descriptions matched perfectly. This strongly suggested that whatever he saw that night was the same shadowy entity that had been haunting these other campers. It remains unknown if anyone else in the area witnessed the same apparition, but Stephen, fearful of being ridiculed, chose to keep quiet about it. Even now, he struggles to talk about the event, which is why he asked for his real name to remain undisclosed. So what do you think? Is it pure coincidence that 3 different people, including a park ranger, witnessed the same eerie figure? Or was there truly a shadow entity wandering Yosemite National Park that night? Now let's turn to another chilling disappearance. On March 17th, 2012, Derek Luking mysteriously vanished in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. But this case took a strange turn right from the start. When authorities located his abandoned car, they found a cryptic note left behind. It read simply, "Derek of VO, don't try to follow me." Immediately, many suspected that Derek had set out on a suicide mission, perhaps planning to disappear into the wilderness and end his life. But this didn't stop search and rescue teams, family and friends from desperately looking for him. The search was difficult from the start. By the time authorities realized Derek was missing, several days had already passed without any word from him. At just 24 years old, Derek had been working as an orderly at the Peninsula Behavioral Health Center in Tennessee. But in the days leading up to his disappearance, something was off. One day, he simply stopped showing up to work without warning. Derek's family quickly grew concerned when he stopped answering calls or returning messages. They suspected his disappearance was deeply tied to the recent loss of his grandfather, a man Derek was incredibly close to. In fact, his vanishing act eerily coincided with the anniversary of his grandfather's death, leading many to believe that he simply couldn't cope with the grief. As they searched for him, they learned that Derek had been staying at a hotel in North Carolina. But by the time his family arrived to check on him, he was already long gone. Then, while driving back to Tennessee, his family made a chilling discovery. Derek's car was parked along Newfound Gap Road, a remote stretch of highway that crosses the Appalachian Trail. It was an unsettling find. As the location suggested, he may have just walked into the woods with no intention of returning. When law enforcement arrived, they searched the vehicle and found a cryptic note. "Derek, VO, don't try to follow me." At first, this seemed to confirm fears that Derek had taken his own life. But investigators soon noticed strange inconsistencies that cast doubt on this theory. Inside his car, they found his wallet full of credit cards and ID, along with newly purchased camping gear, including a sleeping bag, tent, and a detailed park map. Why would someone planning to disappear forever buy fresh supplies for survival? This led to new, unsettling questions. Had Derek actually intended to camp in the wilderness? If so, why leave behind his gear? Or was something more sinister at play? Had he been lured into the woods, or worse, had he fled in fear, possibly at gunpoint?
Derek was a huge fan of Bear Grylls and Man vs. Wild. I really think he may have set off into the wilderness to prove something to himself, seeking solace in nature. He was such an experienced outdoorsman.
As the case gained national attention, one of Derek's close friends shared these insights, shedding light on Derek's character and his love for the wild. But park rangers weren't convinced. They examined his gear and concluded that it wasn't sufficient for an extended survival trek. We looked at what he had with him, and honestly, it just wasn't enough for a long-term stay out there. It raised some serious doubts about what might have happened. Determined to find answers, over 60 searchers and 3 dog teams scoured the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, covering more than 70 miles of trails. They searched deep crevices, rappelled down cliff faces, and combed every hidden nook of the forest. Nothing, not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace of Derek. As news of his disappearance spread, Appalachian Trail hikers and campers shared warnings and speculation. How does a man simply vanish without a single clue left behind? Anyone passing through the area was quick to hear about Ryan Calloway's disappearance. Hikers, campers, and park visitors kept an eye out, hoping to find a trace of him. But despite the park being full of people, the spring season bringing clear skies and warm sunlight, not a single person had spotted Ryan anywhere. As time passed, many began to suspect that he had wandered off the trail. Whether it was intentional or not was up for debate. But one thing was clear: if he had left the main paths, the chances of finding him were significantly lower. By March 23rd, nearly a week after he vanished, the search effort had turned up nothing. Aside from his abandoned car, a cryptic note, and unused supplies, there was no trace of him. With no new leads, officials scaled back the search, reducing it to smaller teams that focused on the more frequently traveled areas of Redwood National Park. Then something unexpected happened. On March 18th, just days into Ryan's disappearance, a second man went missing, this time near Prairie Creek Trail. His name was Michael Casella, a 23-year-old from San Jose, California. Strangely, he had been last seen outside a Walmart earlier that same day. Like Ryan, he seemed to have vanished without a trace. A separate search party made up of park rangers and rescue personnel was dispatched to look for Michael, but just like with Ryan, nothing turned up. Unlike Ryan, however, Michael was not an experienced outdoorsman. He wasn't a hiker, a camper, or even someone who enjoyed being in the wilderness. So why was he out in Redwood National Park? And how had he disappeared just like Ryan? Fast forward to August 21st, 2012. After months of searching, officials finally found something. Scattered across a remote area of the park, they discovered several personal items believed to belong to Michael. Nearby, they made a chilling discovery: skull fragments. On September 6, 2012, the Humboldt County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that the remains belonged to Michael Casella. The most disturbing part? His remains were found just 0.3 of a mile from where his car had been parked since March. Despite finally uncovering Michael's fate, Ryan Calloway was still missing. To this day, there has been no sign of him. While officials suspect that Michael may have taken his own life, Ryan's case remains a mystery. Did Ryan set off into the wilderness intending never to return? Did he panic, get lost, and succumb to the elements? Or did something more sinister happen? Even now, over a decade later, Ryan Calloway's disappearance remains unsolved, and perhaps we'll never know what really happened in Redwood National Park that spring. Her name is Emma, and she used to be a volunteer ranger in Glacier National Park from 2016 to 2018. During her time there, she had a deeply unsettling experience. one she never thought possible.
She describes it as something straight out of her worst nightmares.
Her sighting took place near Many Glacier Valley on a late spring evening in 2017. Emma and her friend, another volunteer ranger, were assigned to patrol the area around 8:30 p.m. The sun was setting behind the peaks, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape. It wasn't completely dark yet, but visibility was low enough that they had to use their headlights as they drove along a remote park road. That's when they saw something move in the tree line. At first, they assumed it was a bear about to cross the road. Slowing down, they prepared to stop, until the creature emerged from the shadows. What stepped onto the road was not a bear. It was massive, easily 5 feet tall on all fours, covered in thick matted fur that was dark brown with patches of gray. Its eyes glowed in the headlights, and its face looked eerily wolf-like but distorted, like something was wrong with it. Emma and her friend sat frozen, staring at this impossible creature. It had massive front limbs that upon closer inspection resembled hands more than paws. Its muzzle was elongated, with sharp, jagged teeth that looked too large for its mouth. The creature had a powerful, muscular build, but its waist tapered unnaturally, giving it an almost humanoid appearance. Then it howled. Liam was already done with this guy. Looking back, he wished he had listened to his instincts. They should have bought the mushrooms and left the dealer behind, but Rachel wanted to save money, so she agreed to let him come. And that decision would change everything. Its head remained perfectly still while its body moved forward in an almost shape-shifting manner, gliding in an unnervingly slow motion. Glenn described it as resembling a high frame rate recording, smooth, fluid, almost unnatural. The more he focused on it, the more its form took on the eerie resemblance of a mantis. As it drifted closer, it gradually became translucent again, fading into nothingness right before their eyes. The moment it vanished completely, the strange electrical whirring surrounding its body ceased, and both Glenn and his friend found themselves able to move again. Without hesitation, they turned and sprinted back to their car, overwhelmed by a fear unlike anything they had ever experienced. Having spent years in the wilderness, Glenn had encountered countless animals, but nothing like this. It wasn't a creature known to man. It was grotesque, otherworldly. He suspected it was cloaking itself or employing some ability beyond human understanding. Glenn, who had also witnessed UFOs in the past, believed this entity was some kind of mantis-like being, though its purpose remained a mystery. It hadn't shown aggression, but rather an unsettling curiosity, as if it were observing and studying them. The area was known for its high concentration of cryptid sightings, paranormal events, and even Bigfoot encounters, making Glenn wonder if there was a deeper connection between these phenomena. As an experienced outdoorsman and hunter, Glenn was no stranger to the strange and unexplained. But this encounter left him with more questions than answers. So, what do you think about today's episode? Are these terrifying encounters genuine accounts of real phenomena, or could they simply be fabrications? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I release new videos every single day, Monday through Sunday. As always, keep an open mind. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll see you in the next episode. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and comment with your thoughts. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I love you all. Stay curious, keep an open mind, and I'll catch you in the next one.